Work is rooted in a very simple but important belief that every child has the right to be taught to read and write, regardless of their educational label or disability. Too often, those pupils are still not accessing meaningful literacy education. Sometimes that exclusion is obvious, but very often it's much quieter than that. It happens through lowered expectations, reduced access, delayed opportunities, and assumptions about what a child is or is not capable of before they've been properly taught. So today we want to explore literacy through the lens of access, expectations, and entitlement. We want to think together about what literacy really is, what gets in the way for pupils with complex needs, what happens when those barriers are left unchallenged, and what our professional responsibility is once we understand that more clearly. I'm Chantal Bryan, I'm the director of Teach Us 2. Teach Us 2 was founded by my son Jonathan, whose experience of being denied meaningful literacy teaching in his special school led to me taking him out of special school for an hour a day to teach him to read and write at home. Literacy transformed his life and ours as a family, and Jonathan's journey was the catalyst for Teach Us 2.
Good morning everyone, my name's Sarah Giles, I'm the Education and Training Lead at Teach Us 2. My background is as a primary school teacher and Senko across a variety of mainstream settings.
At the heart of Teach Us 2 is Jonathan's story. Jonathan's life and work have helped expose what happens when profound physical disability and communication differences are mistaken for a lack of understanding or a lack of literacy potential. His story reminds us that for many children, the issue is not the absence of ability, but an absence of opportunity, access, and belief. Teach Us 2 was founded by Jonathan, so we're going to start with a few words from him.
Did you find that uncomfortable? Perhaps you wrote disabled or wheelchair user. You may have non-verbal written down. You are right. But there is more to me than the body I'm trapped in. I am here to dispel the assumption that non-verbal children
me
are incapable of learning to read and write. When I entered the education system, I was labelled as having profound and multiple learning disabilities and enrolled at a special school. At first I enjoyed my time, making new friends and having fun with my lovely teacher, who made lessons engaging, varied and entertaining. But can you imagine being stuck in a reception class, but without the teaching? Aged 5, aged 6, aged 7. Outwardly I looked vacantly stupid. Inwardly I was amusing myself, lost in my own thoughts. When my peers were starting year 3, I was taken out of my special school for an hour a day to be taught by my mother to read, write and do basic maths. I tried using an eye gaze computer, but it couldn't read my eyes very well. But my mother and carers could. My access to learning was found. Initially, the progress was slow, but I haven't looked back since. By year 5, 2 years after I started literacy and numeracy lessons at home, I had caught up with my peers and went on the roll at my local primary school. Being able to read and write has totally transformed my life. Now I can communicate exactly what I want to say. My relationships have been renewed as I can hold conversations with family and friends, and there is new life in my free time. I should not need to tell you this story. My story of learning to read and write should not be unique. When you next meet a child with PMLD, please think, Has their access to learning been found? How can that access be used to teach them to read and write? As professionals, you have the power to start breaking down the assumptions that yoke children like me. Use it well.
Understand literacy in the same way. If I were to ask you what literacy is, I wonder what you would say to your neighbour. The definition of literacy is the ability to read and write, and that understanding really matters. It's central to our message. As you already know, this session is about the importance of literacy for all learners. So before we go any further, I want to begin by sharing with you what we often hear when we do training courses in schools, and that is that we are already teaching literacy to all of our learners, including those with complex needs. When schools say that literacy is being taught, they usually mean it very sincerely. They are doing what they're doing with good intention. But for many pupils, literacy is not delivered in a meaningful and progressive or recognisable way. For some pupils, particularly those with the most complex needs, particularly those pupils who are non-speaking, those labelled with PMLD, what appears as literacy on their timetables might actually be activities that can be used to support literacy, but not literacy instruction itself. You can see examples of those on the screen there. They are all really valid and important in their own right. Sensory stories using symbols, communication work, and being read to or sharing text. But they do not alone teach children how to read and write. Teachers need to instruct reading and writing explicitly. If we use this broad definition of literacy on timetables, that quiet disapplication for students who have the most complex needs that Chantal was talking about, it becomes the reality. Not intentional disapplication, but quiet, subtle non-instruction. So to understand this more clearly, I just wanted to talk a bit about what literacy is, the development of literacy, and I want to move it away from binaries, from literate and not literate, and ready and not ready for literacy, to look at what literacy really looks like on a developmental scale. Karen Erickson famously says, the only prerequisite to literacy instruction is being alive. If you are born and you are living, you are on the literacy development continuum somewhere, and we travel along it. And those in mainstream school who are typically developing a more conventional literacy learners, for them the path is really clear. We start with emergent literacy in the very early years, and then we track normally in a fairly linear process across all the way through to becoming conventional and proficient readers. Children don't suddenly step onto this continuum when they walk through reception, the doors of reception on their first day at school. They're on it long before that, building up all of that rich literacy experience as the foundations for conventional literacy learning. This matters because not all children have access to those same foundational activities that typically developing mainstream, very young children do, for a variety of reasons. So their experiences of very early literacy can look very different. They develop much more slowly, and they can be devoid in some cases. Some children don't have access to particular building blocks of early emergent literacy skills. Scarborough's reading rope, which I'm sure many of you are really familiar with, breaks down what literacy learning really is. It talks about decoding and language understanding and word recognition. But this is all from the context of conventional literacy instruction. This is the point at which you're typically developing mainstream 4 or 5-year-old walks through the doors of reception and begins to learn phonics. It doesn't address all of the early emergent literacy that happens long before that, which is absolutely vital to get your young person to the point at which they can access this. So we need to think about what that emergent literacy is. I've likened it to the threads that feed the strands of that rope, and you can see that they're extensive. This is not an exhaustive list, but it begins with attention, joint attention, shared attention, independent attention, and then moves through many, many, many different skills. The reason this often goes overlooked is because for those mainstream, typically developing children, we don't explicitly teach this stuff. It just happens through natural development. activities that we engage with our young people, it happens naturally. Parents of very young children from birth to the point they start school aren't setting out with a curriculum of emergent literacy skills that they're ticking off year by year. It just happens organically. But for children with difficulty accessing those activities and those skills, it doesn't necessarily happen naturally, and we need to explicitly plan for it. They may start school without lots of those building blocks in place, so we as teachers need to find a way to plan, to explicitly instruct on those foundational skills. Sorry, page turning problems. So what do we mean by emergent literacy? It's all the reading and writing that individuals do before they become conventional readers and writers. It's non-conventional, it's non-linear, it's spiky, it happens at all different times. We don't sit down and have a literacy hour with our 2-year-old, it happens through daily life. It's dependent on context, so place, situation, family environment, educational setting. And it reflects an incomplete understanding of what it is to be a conventional reader or writer. It doesn't look like you are a conventional reader or writer. But it explains how learners make progress towards that, which is what we're aiming for. While all of that's happening, children are building up those foundational skills, the building blocks that get them to the point where conventional literacy is possible. The absence of emergent literacy is mainly due to, for this cohort that we're talking about with complex needs, is mainly due to a variety of barriers. And it's really important that we understand what those barriers are so that when we're planning for explicit emergent literacy instruction, we can overcome those, we can plan to overcome those barriers. So communication access being key. The earlier we talk about introducing a method for a child to communicate, the easier this will be. So we really passionately believe that communication access should be the earliest intervention for all children, preschool. Physical access and motor demands, Kamani's really eloquently said, and so has Gregor, that perceptions of their ability were based on their physical presentation. We know that that is not factual, it's not true. So we need to make sure that we are providing access that overcomes those barriers of physical limitation. Cognitive load and working memory. If you are non-speaking particularly, your cognitive load and working memory strain is much higher than if you are verbal. You are having to hold your thoughts in your mind while you navigate your communication system, whatever that is, before you can then communicate what you want to say. It's much harder, hence it takes more time and it develops more slowly. Regulation. This you will be very well aware of if you're in school settings, and we've got a really fantastic story on our website about a young autistic man called Matthew who talks about the fact that in his school, his behaviour, his outward behaviour was the only way he was able to communicate his frustration. So you can't, they don't happen in isolation, these two things. So regulation and learning are so linked that we can't assume that regulation means that a student isn't ready to learn. It might be that a student isn't ready to learn because they're not being given the opportunity, which is causing frustration and therefore dysregulation. Sensory needs, opportunity and experience, and the biggie at the end, adult assumption and expectation. The biggest barrier to learning for our pupils with complex needs is us. It's the adults in the room. It's the professionals that are supporting them. Because if we begin the conversation with assumptions that limit their potential, they will never reach their potential, because we never expect them to.
So as we just heard from Sarah, one of the most significant barriers to literacy is access. The way a non-speaking person is able to show understanding. Access doesn't have to be high-tech, it doesn't have to be eye gaze, as we heard from Gregor earlier, or a complex device. At its most basic level, access can be as simple as a reliable yes and no. A way for people to reject or accept, agree or disagree, and show recognition or intention. We've seen pupils make extraordinary progress with nothing more than that. One of the young people we feature on our website is called Amy, and her father worked out that she could access yes and no by intentionally blinking for yes and turning her head away for no. And there's a really powerful story on our website of her being taught to read and write just using that yes and no. Communication and learning are inseparable, as Sarah's just said. If a child cannot communicate their understanding, they cannot demonstrate their learning. Once a pupil has a reliable access method, however basic it is, we can use that access method to teach literacy. And literacy is what becomes life-changing, because when a pupil can use literacy, they can communicate anything they want, not just what is offered on a board or a device, but in their own words. I've seen this as a family. When Jonathan started to write, he told us things that we had no idea about. And actually, as he passed away last summer, and that his words have meant so much to us as a family as we've gone forward. One of the things he talked about was an experience of going to Jesus' garden, which we would never have known about. It was a near-death experience, and that's been really helpful for us as a family to hold on to. So before we make any conclusions about pupils, about literacy, cognition or readiness, the first question must always be, does this pupil have the access that they need to show us what they know? Just doing a quick time check, because this is Matthew's story, so we'll show a little bit of it, because it's so powerful. So you've heard a little bit about Matthew already. Oh no, it's not, we haven't got the video. It's worth looking at the video on our website. Matthew spells by pointing to letters on a board held in front of him, and he talks about what it was like for him being unable to communicate and the assumptions that come with that, and as Sarah talked about, the behaviour. The next barrier is labels. We all know that SEND is awash with labels, and they can be useful, they can guide provision, they can ensure adjustments are made. But the issue is not the label itself, it's what begins to be assumed because of it. As the Children's Commissioner notes, labels can lead to a drop in ambition. They can quietly define possibility before a child has had the opportunity to show us what we can do. And this label, profound and multiple learning disabilities, is the one that I think has the most profound effect for pupils. It is not a diagnosis. A child does not have PMLD. They have been given the label PMLD, and that distinction is really important because I think sometimes it is seen as a diagnosis. Actually, in fact, for children who have not got communication access before they enter school, it is a learning death sentence, or it can be, because that is where all your expectations for a learner will stop. Because as this slide says, from the Core and Essential Service Standards, the most significant of which is a profound intellectual disability. But if you haven't got a way to communicate, you have not shown whether you have any cognitive disability. If you can't say yes and no, and you can't be shown things that show your learning, then how can you then diagnose or give them a label that says they have a profound disability, learning disability? Labels do not remove literacy, but the assumptions behind them do. The other thing is environments. Environments communicate expectations. So on the right of this slide is a picture from a preschool near me. It's for 2 and 3-year-olds. You can't see it very clearly, but there's words on the wall. There are books that are accessible in another part of the room. There's letters of the alphabet on the floor. No one's expecting that 2 or 3-year-old to be able to read at that age. What it says is, you will become a reader. We are expecting you to become a reader. This is literacy, this is print, this is relevant to your life. On the other side, on the far left, there's a picture from a company who do bespoke classrooms for children labelled with PMLD in the bottom there. And you can see there are no words on the wall, there's no books, there's no expectation. That environment says to those pupils, text is not for you. We have no expectation that you will become a reader or a writer. We have taken it all away. It's so powerful. Exclusion is rarely a single decision. It develops gradually through a pattern of assumptions and consequences that reinforce each other. It might begin with uncertainty about potential or with a label that lowers ambition. That leads to reduced instruction. Reduced instruction leads to limited opportunity. limited opportunity leads to limited visible progress, and that limited progress is then interpreted as evidence of inability. This cycle feeds itself. What looks like proof of inability may actually be the consequence of limited access, limited teaching, and limited opportunity. Once we understand this cycle, we can no longer see it as inevitable. It becomes a professional and ethical responsibility to interrupt it. If exclusion can become self-reinforcing, then our responsibility is not to wait for certainty before we teach. This is a diagram of the least dangerous assumption, which tells us that in the absence of conclusive evidence, we should choose the assumption that carries the least dangerous consequences for the child. If we assume inability and we're wrong, the harm is enormous. If we presume potential and we're wrong, we've offered opportunity and not harm. Presuming potential does not mean ignoring complexity. We're not standing here saying this is easy. It means refusing to let uncertainty become an excuse for inaction. Our responsibility is to teach in ways that allow possibility to emerge. This is a slide of different ways that we can support you, and I might hand you back to Sarah actually. So you can...
If you want to find out more about any of these, we have a stand in the main hall. But as a charity, this is what we do. We promote the importance of literacy education. We offer training and workshops. All of the autumn term workshops are available on our website now about the how. How do I start this? There are all sorts of workshops and training courses available. We have an online resource library on our website. We do online CPD free for schools. So if there's as a staff body in your school, if you feel like expectations and assumptions need a little bit of tweaking in order to raise them and really make everybody feel passionate about the importance of literacy in your staff setting, because we know, particularly in special school environments, it's not just the teacher, the responsibility is very widely held. We're happy to do that for free online as a twilight after school workshop. We have convened the Alliance for Inclusive Literacy, which you can find out more about, but the really exciting thing about that is there's an opportunity to join as a community member, where we are building a community of people who share their practice, who seek support from other professionals doing the same thing. Other professionals who feel strongly about this, you can ask questions, share resources, and share what you have learnt along the way. We have just released Profile, which is a charitable offer. It's a progressive framework for inclusive literacy education. Again, we've got a hard copy which you can actually get your hands on and have a look at. But it's a progressive literacy framework which starts from pre-emergent literacy and goes all the way through to A-level conventional literacy. But it allows teachers to demonstrate the tiny steps of progress that pupils like yours might be making, that often, using other frameworks, become invisible to measure. We have a free online inclusive literacy toolkit where you can audit your current provision and then start to do some action planning about how you might improve that across your setting. We host two projects, Transformational Tales and Literacy Landscapes. Transformational Tales is a project that shares the stories of the importance of literacy in the pupil voice. So just like Kamani's spoke earlier about the importance of that pupil voice, this is about us sharing from the perspective of the young people why literacy is so important to them. And Literacy Landscapes is brand new, and that is sharing the perspectives of schools, individual teachers, speech and language therapists, multi-academy trusts about what they are doing in their settings to improve literacy outcomes for these pupils. So there's several schools on there who've already shared their stories. They might inspire you to go back and try something in your own settings. We hosted our first conference this year in April at Swiss Cottage School. I know some of you in this room, I don't know if you're in here, came to that, but that was such a success. We've got another one. Unfortunately for people from London, it's up north, but you'd be very welcome to come. That is all on our website too. And we host a variety of parent-carer resources on our website too. So please do take a look. There is something there that can support each and every one of you.
Yeah, do come and say hello to us in the day. So we started with Jonathan's story, and we're going to end with a poem that he wrote.
This poem is my experience in the classroom of having no access to a literacy curriculum due to the label PMLD. We are not capable of learning, so do not tell me there's something going on behind the disability. Treated as useless handicaps, minds with nothing in there, tragically stuck in a wheelchair, disabilities visibly crippling, just incontinent and dribbling. We are not academically able. You should make our minds stagnate in special education. We cannot learn to read, learn to spell, learn to write. Instead, let us be constrained by a sensory curriculum. It is not acceptable to say we have the capacity to learn. School should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. You are deluded to believe that our education can be looked at another way. But this poem is also my vision of what is possible in PMLD classrooms, where access to the curriculum is concentrated on and used to teach pupils. It is a reverse poem. Here it is, read from the bottom up. Our education can be looked at another way. You are deluded to believe that school should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. We have the capacity to learn. It is not acceptable to say, be constrained by a sensory curriculum. Instead, let us learn to write, learn to spell, learn to read. We cannot stagnate in special education. You should make our minds academically able. We are not just incontinent and dribbling, disabilities visibly crippling, stuck in a wheelchair, minds with nothing in there, tragically treated as useless handicaps. There's something going on behind the disability, so do not tell me we are not capable of learning.